Right now, President Obama addressing the UN General Assembly today and calling for tough consequences for Syria if they fail to act. We'll have the very latest. And next, Mr. Cruz goes to Washington. Even a marathon speech in the Senate floor won't get him his way on defunding Obamacare. The question is, what will they come up with next? And tonight, we hear from former Congressman John Hall from everything about his time in Washington, the fight here for congressional races, and even his music career. Good evening and welcome to RFL, everyone. I'm Richard French, and thanks so much for joining us this Tuesday evening, September 24th. And we start tonight with President Obama's address before the United Nations General Assembly today. He used his turn on the world stage to focus on the Middle East and insisted that the U.S. would use its power in the region if it was needed to protect interests and, in some cases, to avert humanitarian tragedies.
The United States of America is prepared to use all elements of our power, including military force, to secure our core interests in the region. We will confront external aggression against our allies and partners, as we did in the Gulf War. We will ensure the free flow of energy from the region to the world. We will dismantle terrorist networks that threaten our people. And finally, we will not tolerate the development or use of weapons of mass destruction.
Now, the president also urged the UN Security Council to mandate consequences if Syria fails to cooperate with a plan to hand over its chemical weapons.
There must be a strong Security Council resolution to verify that the Assad regime is keeping its commitments. And there must be consequences if they fail to do so. If we cannot agree even on this, then it will show that the United Nations is incapable of enforcing the most basic of international laws.
Now, the president's address, it comes just after a series of quick shifts of policy when it comes to U.S.-Syria. Now, first, White House threatened to strike Syria, as you know, and then it backed away from that posture. Then came the diplomatic avenue orchestrated by the U.S.-Russia backdoor channel, some say for as long as 6 months in the works. Now, President Obama attempted to thread the needle, all while at the same time challenging the UN to do more. The open-ended question is, did he succeed? I want to bring in our panel on this. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist, author. John Hall, former Democratic congressman from New York's Hudson Valley. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. All right, I'll start first with you, Congressman, in that we said it, I think, fairly. It was a tough needle to thread here for the president. He wanted to show he was serious. I don't think in his heart of hearts he really wanted the military strikes. Otherwise, I think he would have acted very quickly before even going to Congress. But at the end of the day, he still is taking the posture that I want you, UN, to back me up in the event that Syria doesn't come through, and I want you, Congress, to give me the authority to strike here if, in fact, Assad isn't to be trusted. I'll put you in Congress, not because I'm trying to torture you, but I'll put you back in Congress. Would you have authorized the use of force if you had to cast a vote?
Not at the point when they were about to be asked for it. And I would say the same thing to President Obama that I said to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice when I met with her during my first term, which is, don't forget the only time that a nuclear nation, went non-nuclear without a shot being fired, and that was South Africa, who everybody knew had nuclear weapons, and they, I was on the other side. I was saying isolate them, disinvest, pull all of our money out of there and so on. And President Reagan, who I disagreed with at the time, said, instead we'll do constructive engagement. We'll send diplomats, we'll send academics, we'll send sports teams, we'll send ballet companies and musicians and business people and convince them that our way is a better way. And they did disarm unilaterally without violence, and it was a combination of all that, as it could be here, with the knowledge that there's always in the background the possibility of force. But I think diplomacy should always be first.
Can you do diplomacy in the middle of a civil war? We've already seen chemical weapons used, genocide, and the fear is, certainly from the people on the ground, that Assad has basically been given a green light, that there'll be no consequences for horrific actions.
Well, it certainly makes it more difficult, the fact that there was a civil war going on. But at the same time, in South Africa, there was a very dicey situation with the the apartheid regime and Nelson Mandela in jail, and a powder keg of the minority black population, ready to explode. And that was not an easy one to thread either. So I think it takes, what the president is trying to do, and I hope he's successful, is to keep that that threat, sort of in the background, so that so Assad doesn't forget where this all started. He never admitted he had chemical weapons until there was a threat.
The news today, even seemingly to Trump Syria, which we thought was going to be the lead maybe as early as last week, was Iran. And the president, he discussed Iran's nuclear program today. Take a listen.
I do believe that if we can resolve the issue of Iran's nuclear program, that can serve as a major step down a long road towards a different relationship.
Now, there had been talk earlier today that the president and the new Iranian president, Hassan Rouhani, they'd meet today. It didn't happen. The leaders of the U.S. and Iran, they haven't met since the hostage crisis back in '79. It would have been a really big deal. It didn't happen. However, there still was major movement, Dominic. You had right on the floor of the UN saying that they had no intention to develop a nuclear weapon. They said it's against Muslim teachings, and they basically are extending the olive branch. Now, between the promise and the reality, obviously we got a long way to go, but nonetheless, there does seem to be at least the talk of a much different Iran than when we saw Ahmadinejad here not long ago. It seems to have turned on its ear.
It does appear to be that way, Richard. The congressman mentioned diplomacy, and you've talked about this president sometimes, I don't want to use the word luck, but falling into the right opportunity, and it appears that things are lining up for the Obama administration, at least to the degree that we're not, as the president said in his speech today, he wants to move away from talking about military force all the time and try diplomacy first. And as of right now, he said words, actions have to back it up, but it appears to be the doors opened as of right now.
Obviously, you get a skeptical Israel as you'd assume they would be. That all said, it is interesting how different it is, Andrew, than it was 12 months ago.
Oh, absolutely.
6 months ago,
You've got
3
the
months
president
ago.
saying he wants to end the policy of 30 years of separation between the U.S. and Iran and actually begin to engage them. There was a chance that might have happened today at the UN. It didn't, but it still could down the road. You've got the Iranian president saying just a few minutes ago that there's no issue that can't be resolved through moderation and rejection of violence. I mean, this is dramatically different than what we heard from Ahmadinejad. And it reminds me, A, things change very quickly, and sometimes when you least expect it. And B, it can be dangerous trying to plot out foreign policy in public. This is something that's usually done best behind closed doors and in.
It was funny. Even the meeting today we were talking about, the reason they couldn't do it was they're worried about the optics back home. Both of them, but especially the Iranian president. All right, finally, the president of Brazil. Not something we thought we'd be talking about tonight, but Dilma Rousseff. She used her address to the UN General Assembly to go after the U.S., condemning electronic surveillance by the U.S. Now, NSA documents leaked by Snowden, as we all know, revealed that, among other things, the U.S. had monitored the Brazilian president's phone calls, Brazilian embassies, and even spied on the state oil corporation. Rousseff had already put off a planned visit to D.C., and today she came out swinging, saying, among other things, quote, tampering in such a manner in the affairs of other countries is a breach of international law and is an affront of the principles that must guide the relations among them. The right to safety of citizens of one country can never be guaranteed by violating fundamental rights of citizens of another country. And Congressman, it's funny, every time I think that domestic surveillance is going to be a big issue here, and certainly we've had enough headlines just stateside, it always seems to get pushed to the second, third issue, and you hear from a lot of people, maybe a collective shrug, especially the younger generation. But it almost takes an international incident here for it to get kicked back to the front page. You've been talking about this even around the country at different events. Yeah, domestic surveillance and basic rights to privacy, maybe we don't talk about it here, but around the globe they are.
Yeah, they are, and they are here on college campuses like Denison University, where I was just paired up with Barry Goldwater Jr., former congressman from California, and son of the great Barry Goldwater, who was the leader of the conservative movement in this country, and a presidential candidate. And one of the most common questions we heard during our couple days at Denison from the students there was, what presumption of privacy do we have on the internet? And to our distress, both Congressman Goldwater and I agreed that basically you don't have any. Snowden did not work for the NSA. He worked for a private contractor. I mean, if the access to information gets away from the government into private corporations' hands, down to the lower levels of those corporations.
But isn't it already there? I mean, the scariest part is, aren't we fighting about what's already happened? We never had a debate about this in the country.
Doesn't Facebook already tell us that they collect all this information about
Get in line. There's a bunch of others along with them. I mean, to me, the scariest thing about this is we're debating about something, if we even can have a debate, that's already past us.
Right. Well, the young people of this country and folks my age as well want to rein it in. And my understanding from both, one Republican, one Democrat at that event, and from the entire audience of students we spoke to, is that there should be an expectation of privacy unless you've done something, written something, or communicated to somebody who's a threat to the United States.
Are you more worried about surveillance and use of your private information by private companies or the government?
It's interesting. Most people I talk to, including these kids, think privacy is a principle that should be upheld. And whether it's for commercial use or whether it's intrusion or surveillance by the government, unless you're threatening another person.
It's funny, you said principle, not a basic right. It's funny how
some
people.
Right. I'll add that.
We talk about Fourth Amendment and the idea of maybe we should redefine what the Fourth Amendment is, and people don't get freaked out by that. It's always shocked me. It's like, wait a minute, you have a right to privacy in this country. Why are we willing to debate it? That's one of our core rights here, and everyone's like,
Well, people want to be protected.
Yeah.
So when something bad happens security-wise, all of a sudden it's like, let's snoop on them. But when you back off and consider the principle, I think most people would agree that unless you have a direct connection to a terrorist cell, or if you yourself are plotting something that can be picked up, that's reason to
It's amazing.
Watch.
You have Brazil reading us the riot act. And I got to tell you, when I heard what they said, she was right. And you're like, my God, we've gotten to the point where Brazil's telling us about basic, liberties.
How would we react if it was swapped the other way and it was Brazil spying on us, or Russia spying on us, or any of these other countries spying on us?
Again, some of the, China, for instance, we know has spied on us.
But we would be livid if we found out that it was happening to the same degree, and especially to our executives, our leadership, our political leadership, to that extent. And also, I keep getting reminded, we keep hearing these stories that come through Snowden. I know that's an issue of an altogether different subject, but that's a lot of insight that we didn't always have. As to the other point about government versus corporate privacy, most of the time we volunteer our stuff to corporations.
Accept terms of
right, it's the click, the agree thing on iTunes. Governments take it away from us. Governments can lock us away and kill us.
Speaking of, yes,
just quickly, the president of Brazil, she's made it clear she's not playing with this issue. She's deeply offended. This is the second time she's acted out. This is an issue that's not going away.
Yeah, and as much as people, like I say, can do the shrug back stateside, there will be consequences for this stuff, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. And speaking of Big Brother, no, we want your comments. Go to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on our question here tonight. What do you think? Should the president meet with the president of the U.S., meet with the head of Iran? They almost did it today. Would you get behind that? And optically, do you think we're ready for that? Up next, Mr. Cruz goes to Washington. You're looking at live pictures right now. The senator from Texas, proud Tea Partier, is using every trick in the book to try and defund Obamacare, including talking till he drops tonight. The question is, at the end of the day, do you really get anything done other than getting his name in the papers? We'll get into that and more after this.